Welcome to WatchGuard Security Week in Review, a video podcast dedicated to quickly summarizing the biggest information and network security stories each week and to sharing practical security tips along the way. I'm your host and a security geek, Corey Nachreiner, and this is the episode for the week starting May 11th, 2015. Let's jump right in and talk about this week's Daily Security Bites. Monday, I want to warn you about an upcoming Adobe Reader patch. Adobe released their pre-announcement for Adobe Patch Tuesday. Like Microsoft, Adobe releases their updates on the second Tuesday of the month. And they've said they're planning on releasing a big Reader update tomorrow. Now, just about everyone installs Adobe Reader. This is a product you often use to read PDF files, which are very popular. And by the way, PDF files and Reader vulnerabilities are targeted among attackers. Many spear phishing emails will often use PDF files to launch malware on your system. So if you're an Adobe Reader user, you definitely should go and get that Adobe update tomorrow. By the way, while we're talking about Patch Day, I mentioned last week that Microsoft claims they're no longer going to be doing Patch Tuesday for Windows 10. Now, it's unclear whether or not they're going to start that this month, so I'm not sure whether or not Microsoft will release Patch Day notifications tomorrow. But rest assured, if they do, we'll be sure to let you know. And on Tuesday, we are talking about Microsoft Patch Day. And this, by the way, is despite the fact that at Microsoft's Ignite conference last week, they said they're no longer going to be doing a monthly patch cycle for Windows 10. Despite that news, there is Patch Day this May, and Microsoft has released a number of updates, basically 13 bulletins covering 48 vulnerabilities in most of their popular products. These include, of course, Windows, Internet Explorer, Office, the .NET Framework, and Silverlight. Now, there's no point in giving you all the details, but if I were you, I would focus on the Internet Explorer update first. It fixes over 20 flaws in the popular browser, which bad guys can use in drive-by download attacks, which are pretty common. There's also a couple of critical Windows vulnerabilities, for instance, a flaw in Windows Font Driver. And this means that if a bad guy can get you to open a web page or a document with a malicious font, he can execute code on your computer. So if you are a Microsoft administrator, moral of the story is definitely try to apply all of these updates as soon as you can. Start with the critical ones first. One additional note, if you use WatchGuard XTM or Firebox appliances and you have our IPS service, we do have a number of signatures that can protect you from many of these new vulnerabilities. So make sure to have your IPS update regularly. And by the way, I mentioned the Adobe update yesterday. Adobe did release that Reader update I mentioned, and they also released a Flash update as well. So once you patch Microsoft's flaws, you might want to go after the Adobe ones too. And on Wednesday, I'm talking about a DDoS attack powered by consumer routers. I've talked about many small home office router vulnerabilities in the past, but this week's research comes from a company called Incapsula. They were noticing a number of DDoS or distributed denial of service attacks affecting their customers, so they decided to do some research into the incident. As it turned out, they found a particular brand of small home office consumer router that was actually powering this DDoS attack. This particular router allowed default web and SSH access to the router, and many of these routers still had their default administrative password. So obviously bad guys used this external access and default password to install malware on the Linux-based router, and this malware allowed the home office router to participate in DDoS attacks. So the moral of this story is pretty simple. If you have any network gear, whether it's for your business or for your home, you should always change its default password. And as far as security devices go, this really shouldn't be your problem. If you're buying something as important as a router or a network security appliance, it should force you to change its defaults like WatchGuard does. But in the future, as you buy network gear, make sure to change the default passwords and deny access to any web administrative interfaces that you don't want the outside world to gain access to. On Thursday, we're talking about a new virtualization vulnerability called Venom. Venom is something discovered by CrowdStrike, and it's a vulnerability in QEMU, which is a virtualization platform used to create virtual environments, and it's used by Zen and KVM and other platforms out there. And whether or not you love or hate these marketing vulnerability names, Venom does stand for something: Virtualized Environment Neglected Operations Manipulation. And all that silly name means is CrowdStrike found a vulnerability in the virtual floppy disk controller that comes with QEMU. And you heard me right, I said floppy disk disk controller. Even though we don't use floppy disks anymore, and you probably don't have any virtual machine where you've enabled a floppy disk, there is a virtual floppy disk controller because QEMU is quite a old, long-standing product. But anyways, there's a flaw in the code for this virtual floppy disk. And even if you disable this virtual floppy disk according to the alert, you can still leverage this vulnerability. Now, essentially, it's the elevation of privilege vulnerability that can escape the confines of your virtual machine. So if I'm a bad guy and I have access to one of the virtual machines running on your host and I have administrative or root access, I can leverage this flaw to actually execute code on the host itself, which means I have access to all the virtual machines and even the host itself. It's a pretty severe virtualization flaw, but not one we haven't seen in other products before. So how do you fix this? Well, there are patches available. There's a QEMU patch, there's ones for Red Hat, KVM, and many of the platforms that use QEMU. Go get it. Another thing you can do is limit privileges on your virtual guest operating systems. If you're running a virtual environment where you don't need to give your guest users administrative or root access, they won't be able to exploit this particular flaw. And Friday's news is Grand Theft Auto related malware. I figured I'd keep Friday kind of fun by talking about gaming related security news, but this may not be fun news if you're a Grand Theft Auto 5 PC player. It turns out that some of the most popular mods and plugins have been infected with a particular type of malware. If you play these sorts of games, you know that a mod is something that allows you to add a neat feature to a game. Like, for instance, you can drop whales from the sky in Grand Theft Auto. Well, two of the more popular mods, one is called No Clip, which allows you to walk through walls and other things, and the other more popular one is called Angry Planes, and this is a modification that causes planes to actually attack your character wherever he is. However, these two mods on a particular website were infected with malware. I won't go into all the details, but if you install the modification and play it, the malware actually gains control of your computer and starts a keylogger and steals things like your credentials to your social networks and even some of your Steam account information. Now, the original forum that found this also shares a lot of detailed information on how to remove this, which I'll put in the blog post for this video, so that's some good news. On top of that, if you use antivirus or if you use WatchGuard's gateway antivirus, we can actually catch and block this particular threat. So the moral of the story is be very careful where you download things, make sure to use antivirus software and keep it up to date, and finally, if you are a GTA 5 mod user, be sure to check that you haven't installed these malicious mods. Well, this has been quite a week. I hope we helped keep you informed and maybe educated, plus helped you get the latest patches. But as always, there were really a ton of other stories out there I didn't get a chance to cover. So if you haven't visited our blog at blog.watchguard.com, be sure to do so. That's where I post this video. And in its links section, I have references to all kinds of other interesting stories, so go check it out. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at SecAdept, or you can follow WatchGuard at WatchGuardTech. Finally, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel and you want to get these videos right away, be sure to do that as well. Thank you for watching, and here at WatchGuard, we're rooting for you.